Hey everybody, it's Tim Baldermann and welcome to this edition of Too Honest for Social Media, where we talk about local, state, and federal issues. We talk about government, we don't talk about politics, unless, of course, politics is the driving factor behind government decisions. Joining me today is an expert in the government field, a good friend as well, Hugh O'Hara, the Executive Director of the Will County Governmental League. Hugh, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Mayor.
And we're going to get into, of course, your position. But before that, I've known you for a long time, and I know there's an organization that you're very involved in. You're very passionate about. Why don't we talk about that real quickly? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. In addition to my regular duties, I do a lot of work with a group that was formerly JDRF, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, which is now called Breakthrough T1D. They do a lot of work to find out, look for cures and make life better for people with type 1 diabetes. I've got a daughter that has it. She's had it for about a decade now, and we've seen a ton of improvements in that space, a lot through the research and fundraising that they've been able to do, and then partnerships with the federal government. So do a lot of lobbying in that space for them, just as something to do with my vacation days is to go spend time in Washington asking for more money.
Well, that's all right. The daughter's doing well?
She's doing real well.
That's outstanding. Well, that's good to hear. Well, we appreciate that. It kind of goes to show, just what kind of person you are. You've always been a guy of integrity. You and I have had a lot of conversations on and off mic.
We have.
But certainly I respect you and what you do, and good luck with your continued work with the juvenile diabetes. So, all right, we are here to talk about your role, though, as the Executive Director of the Will County Governmental League. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what that entails.
Yeah, so we've got 33 local governments that are members. 2 of those are counties, Will and Grundy County, and then 31 municipalities all across Will and Grundy counties. We go from the Indiana border to Morris. We work a lot on all kinds of issues, transportation, long-range planning, all kinds of legislative issues, largely at the state, but a little bit at the federal level. We hand out some federal grant money that goes to municipalities for road projects. Your big Cedar Road roundabout was partially funded by some funds through the Governmental League. So we do about $10 million a year right now in those funds. And then, like I said, we represent our communities on a lot of different regional entities, bodies, where local mayors who are not full-time and don't have the time or expertise to go to all these meetings, we sort of fill in for them and report back and get that information back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the cogs, you do a great job with that. And getting to the roundabout, we've had a number of discussions about our roundabout here that everyone bitched about, and now that it's in, they forgot that they complained because they love it. But the funding that we got from Governmental League was substantial. It paid a big portion of that.
Yeah, it was several $1 million towards it. So it was a good amount of money, and we're able to do that. Most of the communities in our county are part of our transportation program. So we've been able to spend a lot of money in the county and handle those smaller projects that maybe don't get federal or state attention, but are equally as important to the municipality.
Absolutely, they are. That was a big one for us, so we appreciate that. All right, let's dive right in. Again, most of the people here in New Lenox who know me know where I stand politically. I don't care about politics, quite honestly. I'm about good government, and I'm equally frustrated right to left, and and for good reason. Whether we're talking about local, county, state, federal. Let's get a couple things out of the way because we're going to be talking about Illinois today, which, as we know, is under Democratic control and has been for quite some time. But just so everyone realizes, as you know, I'm not just a homer for one team. So, number one, Trump lost in 2020. Okay, that's number one. Number two, January 6th was an abomination, and anyone that crashed the Capitol or committed any damage or injury shouldn't have been pardoned. They should have been prosecuted. This is my opinion.
So you want to start with all the non-controversial topics.
Yeah, exactly. Those are not controversial at all. But my point is, when I see wrong, I see wrong. And what we see happening here in Illinois is really very disappointing. And we understand, we're realists. When one party has control, they kind of push legislation that falls in line with their ideological beliefs. Okay, that's fine. They were elected, that's what they do. But when it's clearly driven by a political agenda as opposed to an ideological belief, and there's a distinction there, especially when it has a negative impact on us, I think we have to call that out. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about here today.
Sounds fair.
Let's start with some of the legislation that's already been enacted.
Yeah.
Number one, the Safety Act. And there's a lot of misunderstanding.
There is.
Would you agree?
100%.
On what that really is and what it really means.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of misinformation about what the intent of the Safety Act was versus some of the negative outcomes that have come from it. In theory, the idea that you wouldn't be able to buy your way out of pre-trial incarceration makes a whole lot of sense. I don't think it's right or fair that someone's income determines whether or not they've got to spend 3 years awaiting trial in county jail. Doesn't necessarily make sense. But there's obviously individuals that commit acts where they should not be out on the street, and that's part of what the Safety Act has caused, is by allowing everyone that pretrial release. It's made it a little more onerous on the judges and the prosecutors to lock people up who should be kept out of the public awaiting their trial.
100%. When it was being pushed forward, the governor would go around and say, I don't think that a poor woman who steals diapers should have to sit in jail for months. Nobody thinks that. At least most people don't think that. Although with the amount of money we spend on social programs, she shouldn't have to steal diapers. They should be given to her, which I would be okay with. I mean, we're talking about taking care of a child. Let's talk about the murder of the Chicago police officer and the attempted murder of the other one. We're praying that the second officer pulls through.
Yeah.
I know he's in critical condition. But I'm just going to talk about a few highlights of this alleged offender. 7-time convicted felon who was accused of shooting these two police officers, and he's 26 years old. He's not 50. He's 26, and he's a 7-time convicted felon. And as we know in the criminal justice system, especially in Cook County, you don't get a conviction very often. It's typically a supervision, a probation, whatever.
Usually takes a while to get to the point of a conviction, too.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is absolutely right. So records show that this person was on parole in 2 cases and been marked as an absconder from eluding supervision, had a warrant out for his arrest, cut off his ankle monitor. His records show that he was given, in 2019, 4 7-year concurrent sentences for armed robberies. So, I mean, even if he served them all, he'd just be getting out now. But no, he was released way before he should have been. Let's see here. He was arrested again in 21 for being a felon on parole and possession of a weapon. He was sentenced to 3 years in IDOC and was given over a year's worth of credit served for free early release. He was arrested by the state police and charged with several crimes, including unlawful possession of stolen motor vehicle and aggravated fleeing. And while he was in custody in Cook County Jail, he was charged with battering correctional officers. Then, out again, not spending much time in jail, he stopped showing up for court hearings. The warrant was issued for him. He was arrested several months later in April of 25 in connection with violent carjacking. So this guy is out on the street. And when it comes specifically to the Safety Act, and we can talk a little bit about this, but specifically, because his last arrest after all of these convictions, all this jail time, all this violent crime, the last arrest was for possession of a stolen motor vehicle, the judge couldn't detain him because of the Safety Act, and just based on his prior violations.
Yeah, I think and again, I'm gonna go a little into intent of what I've heard from legislators, is that in cases like that, these people should never have been released. Is some of that on the legislators for maybe the wording in the Safety Act? Absolutely. Is some of it also on the prosecutors and the judges? Yeah, they've got to step up their game a little bit too, because it is a different level of burden of proof that they've got to show now to make sure that these types of people do stay incarcerated. So I think that there is some adjustment period. It's hard to say adjustment period, though, when you're talking about police officers that are dead or have been shot, or regular citizens that have been killed or seriously harmed by these offenders that should be locked up. So I do think there is certainly some growing pains here, but there's also reforms that are needed as well.
Well, that's the thing, is there has to be reform, but it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of wiggle room for people wanting to touch this and reform it, because it's not easy.
No.
But I will say the new state's attorney, who replaced one of the worst state's attorneys in Cook County history, I mean, horrible, has brought to light the problem with electronic monitoring and how it doesn't work.
Yeah.
This guy cut off his monitor, and it's falling on deaf ears.
Yeah.
So she's really trying to make a difference and say, no, we have to hold these people accountable. But like you said, the burden that's put on state's attorneys with what they have, they almost have to have enough information and evidence to convict somebody at a pre-trial hearing, which is not possible.
No.
It's insane.
No, and they're not prepared for it. They're not ready for it. You've got 200 years of case law that they're going off of that now has suddenly been shaken up. So they're really in a tough spot. But I don't think there's any. There doesn't seem to be any desire to solve this immediately at the state level.
Right.
It's kind of become a third rail issue of getting into that. The Safety Act, when it passed, there was sort of the perfect storm of issues going on. And I think there's probably some good that has come out of it when you look at all the people that aren't detained for stealing diapers or whatever the other thing is. Those are certainly going to be stories that aren't told. But we do have to figure out how do we tighten that up so that we don't have people getting out that should be kept in. And there just doesn't seem to be a lot of push on that right now. Some of it could be, waiting for cases to go through the court systems, let appeals run through as to whether or not people should or shouldn't be detained. We hear that a lot in Springfield as well. Let's see what the court says before we go and tinker with things. So there is, I think, anyone you talk to on the local level will tell you that reforms need to happen to the Safety Act, and they're absolutely right. But right now, it doesn't seem to be an appetite in Springfield to make those changes.
Right, and I think it's because we've become so accustomed to violence and horrific acts that it's forgotten about the next day. Whether it's a police officer, a civilian, it doesn't matter. I mean, these are not rare cases, which proponents of the Safety Act say, oh, that doesn't happen very often. Some of the other ones were an attack on a CTA blue line that left a woman severely injured with burns throughout her body, was committed by a suspect with 71 prior arrests. 71. An arson fire in Chicago that killed a firefighter by a serial killer who was on felony pretrial release and juvenile probation when he killed 6 people at random. So this is not just every once in a while.
No.
This is happening far too often that it should be at the front. We're talking about people's safety of our state legislators' agenda.
It should be, but right now, whether we like it or not, it's not. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a real push to get that done. There are sort of bills that come up every once in a while that look like they might address the Safety Act, but they end up not going anywhere. They can't get the support that's needed. The speaker has some rules on how many votes he wants on a bill in order to advance it, and it's very difficult to get that number of votes right now.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, we open a show with one that ignites the passions of a lot of people, and rightfully so. But there are other issues. Nothing's more pressing, of course, than violence being committed by people who should be incarcerated.
Right.
I mean, our safety is our number one concern. But let's talk about some of the other things that you deal with, that we deal with. One that we constantly talk about is the local government distributive fund. So why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about what that is? Yeah,
it's effectively it is a portion of your state income tax that comes back on a per capita basis to every community. So in our case, in Illinois, we get about 6.5% of the state income tax that you pay comes back to your municipality. It's like $120-ish. I'll throw that number out because it's a round one.
Sure.
But about $120 per person comes back to your community from your income tax. The expectation is that that's going to pay for all your police, fire, public works, everything else that you do. And the state has been slowly whittling away at that amount. The state used to fund that amount at 10%,
right,
and every year it's crawled back. And then when the state increases the state income tax, our share has not risen proportionally with that new amount. So we continue to see a loss in those dollars, and the cumulative impact is billions of dollars that would have gone to your local governments to help pay for these things, that then gets shifted onto the homeowner via property tax or a local sales tax or some other local revenue that can help fill that gap. But when you cut those state dollars, that's gonna be it's when you're taking away the base of things, it becomes really problematic really fast.
Absolutely. And you're right. It was at 10%. It's at 6.48 or 47, 6.47, and now it's being proposed to go down to 6.28, so a further cut.
Well, being
LGDF.
Told that it's being held harmless.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, because of that drop, as you stated, Illinois counties and municipalities have lost almost $11 billion. And since that drop in New Lenox, because it's factored that what we've lost is about cumulatively is about $851 per person. That puts our loss at about $25 million in New Lenox.
Yeah.
So since those reductions, the taxpayers in New Lenox lost $25 million.
Yes.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're not alone, obviously.
No, because this is one thing that affects every municipality exactly the same across the state.
That's right. Yeah,
it's the only level funding formula that is the same for everyone across the state.
That's right. Now, I will say, because we're not playing politics here, and this is obviously a state run by Democrats, but Anthony DeLuca, who is one of our state local representatives, has been a champion for local government distributive fund increases. He has fought very hard to try and help us with that, but unfortunately, we can't get back to those funding levels or even anywhere remotely close to where we were.
No, and Representative DeLuca, being a former mayor, I think he understands this. There's a lot of former mayors in the legislature. Most of them continue to remember what it was like to be a mayor. Every once in a while, they might forget something about it. But he's been a real champion for it. The amounts that get thrown out is, well, we'll raise you 0.1%, or could we talk about how to get to maybe 7 or 8 over the next decade?
Right.
It was never that deliberate when they cut the funds. It just sort of happened. But we do continue to push to get new funds or new areas of funding. That's a big issue, is, different ways that we can raise revenue, whether through gaming or cannabis. But not every community wants that, and it doesn't fit the character of every community. So this is funding that really should be stable and really is the bare minimum the state can be doing to help fund police, fire, et cetera.
Well, and like you said, this comes from local income tax. We're paying income tax to the state, and it's coming. People are expecting that when you're paying an income tax, it's going to go for services, funding services. You shouldn't have to have sin taxes to make up for the tax that was supposed to be funding the services you're providing.
And this was done as a compromise. Back in the 70s, the state constitution was redone. And one of the things that came out was that locals couldn't do a local income tax. If you go to some other states, even if they have low property taxes or low other taxes, they may have a local income tax, which is how they kind of make up that difference. But we don't have that in Illinois. We gave that up as part of that constitutional change. And the deal was that we would get somewhere around 10%.
Right.
Now, there's two different stories. One says it was 10, one says it was 9. Either way, a whole lot more than 6.478.
Right.
So, it's been slowly taken away, and it's not the only thing that's been taken away. We've seen local revenues disappear, some of it from technological advances. The film processing tax used to be a great tax. You paid a little bit every time you got your photos developed. I don't know about you. When was the last time you took a photo to be developed? But it's probably been a while.
Place at 111th and Cicero.
Yeah,
I went. I think in 1977.
Exactly. Yeah, so
right.
that whole thing has dried up, and that's happened with other things too. Now they'll say, well, we gave you again these other sort of sin tax options, but it's not for everybody, and it shouldn't be what we're counting on.
That's right.
Gaming and cannabis is not a great way to build your base budget.
No, and I can tell you, it does not make up for this either.
No.
Because Where there's cannabis, for example, that would have been another sales tax producing. So it's not like there was nothing there. I mean, so it's not, you're not getting the full extent of what that is anyway.
Yeah, because you see like the alcohol sales numbers are dropping across the country, but you see it especially in states where they have legal recreational cannabis. Sorry, that's a mouthful. But you see it in those states where it's a shifting from what was the liquor tax to now they're raising more on the cannabis tax. And so you're not seeing, it's not a direct trade, but it's certainly close to one.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that the governor has been saying pretty regularly, which is in a very insulting way, is, hey, don't blame the state. Local property taxes come from the local governmental entities, whether they're villages, schools, parks, whatever the case may be, as if the state of Illinois has no impact on local property taxes, which is just completely false.
Correct.
100% false.
The state's failure over many administrations, many legislatures, to fund the schools at the level that they are constitutionally obligated to fund, but they don't, is the direct cause of your property taxes being high. If the state was funding education at that level, they wouldn't be cheap, but they would certainly be lower than they are today.
Well, they'd be a lot lower here. So, for example, you bring up state funding, and I've talked about this for schools. Article 10 of the state constitution, not just the constitution, it's pretty clear language, and it says the state has the primary responsibility for financing the system of public education. Now, as a logical person, what does primary responsibility mean to you? It's got to be at least 50.1%, right?
That's the way I think everyone has always read that.
That's right. Everyone except the state of Illinois. And when it was brought, because, for example, here in our location in New Lenox, our schools are getting 10 to 12% funding. So imagine if they were getting 50% funding, maybe more, but even just 50%, that's 43% of your property tax bill goes to the grade school districts.
Yeah.
Imagine if they were getting 5 times the funding that they're getting from the state.
Yeah.
Make a huge difference. So when that was challenged, and it's in our Constitution where it says the state has the primary responsibility. It doesn't say might have, it says has. What the Illinois Supreme Court came back with, and we see that those candidates are bought as well. I mean, they're paid for. Their campaigns are paid for by influential people in every state, not just here. But
Signs are expensive.
It happens everywhere. What they said was, well, we interpret that to mean that the state is strongly encouraged to provide. Now, I don't know how you get strongly encouraged out of they have the primary responsibility, but that was that. So the other thing the governor likes to talk about when it comes to school funding is how there's been an increase in school funding since he's been the governor. But the reality is public schools are primarily funded by property taxes, but we pay so much more toward education because that increase has mostly gone toward pension costs. It hasn't gone toward classroom costs.
And it's dependent on what your school's financial situation was when a lot of this started. Because as they've moved to this evidence-based model, certain school districts are seeing increases, certain ones are seeing decreases. And you can see it's directly tied to how their financial situation is, which is the right thing to do, is let's help out those that are most challenged. However, they're not doing this in a way where everyone is seeing this increase and everyone is seeing any relief. And even the places that are getting an increase generally are so far behind financially that you're not seeing a decrease in your property taxes either, because they're just trying to catch up.
That's right. And there's two things to that. Number one, in some of those cases, they're in bad fiscal shape because they pissed their money away. And then you've got some other places where they're fiscally responsible, and so they have a better balance. Now, I know that's not always the case, but certainly you go to some of these districts that are cash poor, and you find that they've got layer upon layer upon layer of unnecessary administration and everything else, where that's why they don't have as much money. That's part of it. The other thing is you throw millions of dollars at some of these school districts that are less affluent, but there's no accountability about what they're doing with that money. And so that's a real problem. So I just think it's incredibly, the governor is not stupid. He knows what he's talking about. It's incredibly disingenuous. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and not say dishonest, but it's incredibly disingenuous to say that it's all on the locals, that the state has no impact on what's happening on local property taxes.
Well, as you know, sort of having the different hats that you have, a lot of times the local property tax, that whole blame gets placed on the municipality because it's oftentimes the easiest person to go to is most people probably don't know what their school board member even looks like.
Right.
They know what you look like. They see you at the grocery store, and they're definitely going to let you know if their property taxes went up.
Of course.
Even if the village had no part of it.
Yeah, and we have the lowest, we're less than 4% of the property tax.
And oftentimes it's the municipalities that get left fighting that fight. During the Rauner administration, for 2 years, they had a vote almost every week about capping property taxes. And we had to fight that as municipalities because we're talking about such a small percentage of your property tax bill. You didn't see a lot of help coming from those that were the larger part of it. So,
no doubt.
And that's always a problem too, is just educating people that it's that the municipal portion is pennies on the dollar of your property taxes.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Like 4 cents on your dollar. Now we're getting nothing. And
you're providing
streets and
an awful
police.
lot. Yeah.
Right. No doubt. All right. So in your role, people are always, they're looking for additional funding. They're looking for better legislation. One of the things that's been a hot topic for the last few years has been the spending on illegal immigration. Again, I speak for myself, and I see this. First of all, anytime we're talking about a child, we should take care of that child. I don't care if it's health care, I don't care if it's education, I don't care what it is. A child should never be punished for the actions of an adult.
Agree.
I think we can. Most people can be on that page. I would hope. However, when we are the most taxed state, we've got the highest property taxes. And I'm going to read. So we have the highest property taxes in the nation, the highest combined state and local tax burden in the nation at 16.51%, the third highest corporate income tax rate in the nation, and the fourth worst private sector job growth since 2018. That's pretty bad stuff for us. But over $2.5 billion.
You're not selling Visit Illinois, really.
I'm not selling Visit Illinois. But I think the people who are fleeing here in droves already know this. I don't think this is new information. But in just the last few years, over $2.5 billion has been spent on illegal immigration. And it's not just healthcare, which is one thing. It's housing. It's resettlement services. It's rental assistance.
Yeah.
When there are people who are just above the threshold who can't get state aid that are struggling to make it, but people who have come here illegally and have not gone through the process, $2.5 billion. What are you hearing from state legislators? What's their response to that?
There's definite concern. There is widespread concern that, to your point, there are a lot of people in Illinois that are struggling, and why aren't they getting access to these services? If I were to play devil's advocate and say why would the legislature have spent this money? In part, I think it was in response to, you saw a lot of people end up here from Texas that were bussed up in the last couple of years, and that was very real. Like, we did have buses coming to places in Will County where there's no services to help these individuals, that the state did have to stand up some type of a response to that because, to your point, what are you going to do with people when they show up and you've got a kid with just a blanket and it's 25 degrees out? You're going to try and find them somewhere to stay. You're going to make sure that they've got vaccines, that they've got, proper health care. Can understand that. But then it's when those services are ongoing or there's no limit on how much those are, and you see it eating into things that the state has to pay for. The state used to always say that the first thing they have to pay for is prisons because we got to make sure people who need to be locked up are locked away and make sure that that's taken care of. Then we talk about healthcare and these other things, and you see it eating into those base services of the state. And there is a lot of questions about how do these programs go forward? Should they be cut entirely? Should they be scaled back? And I think you do see a lot of debate, and you've made the point a few times that you've got largely one-party rule in the state. You've got veto-proof majorities in both chambers. Massive Democratic control. But there's big splits within the Democratic Party at the state legislature on you've got your moderate wings, your progressive wings, you've got many different caucuses, all with their own priorities. And so it's trying to cobble together the right groups at this point to get a budget passed. And that's how these dollars end up rising, is you're trying to get to those magic numbers to get your things passed.
And I appreciate that it wasn't necessarily your position. You were taking, as you said, devil advocate's position. And I get that. But I have to respond as well.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not responding to you. I'm responding to that devil's advocate. But the people in Texas would say, well, it was the Democratic federal government that caused this problem by allowing everyone to come in here unvetted. Mm-hmm. And you're all criticizing us, their services down in Texas and Florida were pounded. And you're saying, well, we're a welcoming state. Well, here you go. So you cannot expect it, because it happened in New York, it happened in Illinois. You cannot expect to be the governor criticizing the governors of border states, saying, boy, you're horrible because you're not welcoming these people, but then say, oh, but don't send them to us. It's like all these Hollywood idiots that I remember with the hate. That's how old I am. The Haitian boat crisis, and Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins stood up and said, "Oh, they had the ribbons on. We got to take these people in." Well, you got to imagine how many are living at your house. So you can't say as the governor of Illinois that Greg Abbott is the devil down in Texas because he's complaining about having these people, but then saying, "But don't send them to me."
Yeah, I think that what both governors should have done. And I'll throw in the governor of New York and California and wherever else, all the border states and all the blue states. What they should be doing is pounding on the doors of the folks in D.C. that have kicked this can down the road for decades and have used it as a political football
100%,
and have not wanted to solve immigration in a systematic way. And I think that if there's any issue crying out for federal legislation, and I'm not a big let's have the feds one size fit all but having a national immigration policy and putting to bed some of these issues, whether it's the dreamers or the kids that have come here since dreamers are getting a little old at this point. They're full-grown adults. They're millennials basically. But you've got an entire next generation of kids that have come here with their parents through no fault of their own. What are we going to do, and how are we going to solve this? And it'd be great if DC would wake up and have a grown-up conversation about how do we solve this, what do we do? And then you don't have this issue of the states then taking their cue from the feds and then making politics out of people's lives.
That's it. It's all becoming political, and it absolutely has been a problem on both sides of the aisle over the last 40 years with immigration issues. Both parties have had complete control and have done absolutely nothing. There were those who say, well, we have a law and here it is and you have to follow it. We know it's not as simple as that. So it's either, so what we've dealt with in the last two administrations is complete open borders where anyone can come from wherever they want, and then shut it down. And even people who are trying to do it the right way or trying to rejoin their families can't do it because we've done a complete shutdown. And we all lose because politics is running government.
Correct.
And that's the shame of it.
And the thing is that, at the national level, it's been that way decades. Basically since the advent of cable news, right? It's sort of been the downfall of
social media, to talk cable together. News. Yeah, exactly.
But, it shouldn't trickle down to state politics, and unfortunately it has. And now you're even seeing it in local politics. You shouldn't have to do a podcast like this to talk about issues in a normal way, right?
It's a shame.
It'd be great if people could just get back to, if you're looking at a football field, we used to play between the 40s. Now it's closer to the end zones, and that makes things a lot more difficult.
And it frustrates people like you and I who tend to just want, and there's many others like us. Actually, we're the majority. We are the majority of the people.
When you talk to most people, they just want a competent, basic level of service. They don't want to be taxed out of their homes. They understand that they need the services, but they're crying out for, some relief on trying to pay for it. So
and they're compassionate. They want to see people taken care of too. It's not you're a bigot and a hater if you're over here, or you're a bleeding heart loser if you're over. I mean, the craziness that we've gotten into. All right, let's get back to some more local issues. Unfortunately, there are more that impact us that you have been dealing with. One of them that's been really hot a topic in Will County, I know you've dealt with it, is the legislation that was passed. And I like to give people factual information so they can look it up. It's 55 ILCS 5/5-12020. And that is commercial wind energy facilities, commercial solar energy facilities. The long and short of it is the state of Illinois said through this legislation that counties and municipalities can no longer restrict solar and wind energy if it's on agricultural or industrial property.
So they did it over the course of two bills.
Sure.
So the first one was aimed at counties.
Right.
So what they were seeing is that you had a lot of people that wanted to do wind and solar projects, particularly in downstate Illinois. Mm-hmm. And counties were putting a blanket no to any source any kind of renewable energy.
Sure.
It just came off the top. We're not doing it for whatever political reasons.
Yeah, no green energy because green is bad. Yeah, that's downstate. Yeah,
Let's
I get it.
Keep the coal plants going. So the state said, well, we can't have that. We think that this is important. I think the opening paragraphs of that legislation explain that the state has decided that green energy is the future and we need to go in that direction. The unintended consequence of that is that you've created this belt around Northeast Illinois and around like the Metro East area and a little bit around, say, Champaign, Bloomington, Peoria, any major metro area, where we as municipalities have a responsibility to plan for 1.5 miles out from our municipal borders. You got to spend money. You've got to, effectively plan as though it's your land, even though it's not. So you're spending a lot of money, a lot of taxpayer money to plan to do all these things. Get ready for growth.
Sure.
Now there's no control over where these solar farms can go. They obviously want to go as close to the people as possible. That's where the energy infrastructure is. It's the easiest to hook onto the grid. Makes sense for them to be right up against these populated urban, suburban areas, of which Will County happens to be a big chunk.
Sure.
So they've basically created a situation where the county cannot say no if it meets the state minimum standards. And the state minimum standards are basically, it's a solar farm. Right. There are a few, but for the purposes of general audience, they don't matter. They can't say no.
Right.
What's happened here in Will County is that the county board has repeatedly denied solar farms at the request largely of municipalities who've said, we don't want this right up against our border. We have plans for this. We're investing in infrastructure, assuming people are going to live there. Right. And they've created this situation now where they got sued. It's gone through the appellate level, and the judges have basically said, you have no choice but to approve these.
Based on the legislature.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
And so we've tried to push back on that as hard as possible. We've spent the last 3 or 4 years trying to get some semblance of control back. We think maybe we have a chance within that 1.5 miles because it's already a statutory requirement. But right now, there's absolutely nothing we can do to stop solar. So when people get upset about projects that are 40 square miles of solar, like the one the county's dealing with today, the county board has no authority to stop this right now if they meet those minimums.
Yeah, I mean, just to read it to you, a county may not adopt zoning regulations that disallow permanently or temporarily commercial wind energy facilities or commercial solar energy facilities from being developed or operated in any district zone to allow agriculture or industrial. So you're right, it's gone. The authority is gone.
Yeah.
And you take New Lenox, for example, we at our own expense, put Nelson Road through because the several hundred acres that are next to that was planned residential. We fought a solar farm there. Yep. The county agreed, and now it's been reversed. It wasn't the judge's fault. Everyone got mad at the judge. I said, no, the judge is interpreting the legislation correctly. It's just horrible legislation.
Yes.
And so, that really impacts us. And to your point, we spent a lot of taxpayer money planning for that area, putting infrastructure in. And what bothers me is, again, when you have a governor that constantly criticizes, and in many ways correctly, when the federal government tries to infringe on state rights, but then turns around and does the same thing to us, infringes on local rights and county rights when we've been elected by our people. It's really incredibly hypocritical.
Yeah, and it's not just Illinois where that's happening. It's a trend nationwide of states are really turning a page on how they want to deal with municipalities, and largely they've decided that they're just going to tell us what to do.
Right.
And municipalities we're an instrument of the state. We're created by the state. They can tell us to do pretty much whatever they want, and we don't have much recourse. So unfortunately, it's not just an Illinois trend. It's not just a Will County issue. Nationwide, this is really starting to be something.
Sure, and I think you're right, and it happens on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah,
it's not just one side of the aisle that is imposing their will on locals. It happens on the other side in another state.
Absolutely.
So it is a problem where local rights are being taken away by the state. The problem, like I said, that I have is the hypocrisy of criticizing the federal government when they try to do that by saying there shouldn't be sanctuary states, there shouldn't be sanctuary. And they say, that's none of your business. We get to determine that. But we don't get to determine here in Illinois what we want to do locally. So it's really a problem. And for you have to fight that on a regular basis.
All day, every day.
All day, every day.
Leave us alone and give us our money is kind of the simple mantra for reviewing all legislation.
Listen, I'm with you. As you know, I'm retiring as a superintendent in Union School, which is the only free public education in the state of Illinois. The property tax owners get 100% of their property tax back, and we don't charge kids anything. I get from the state, and I'm a 60% low-income district, but because of my industrial base, I get from the state like $100,000 a year, and I say, I will write you a check for $200,000 if you just stay out of my hair, because your unfunded mandates and everything you do are making it more difficult to educate kids. They're making it more difficult to plow streets, to put police officers on the street. It's just insane.
Well, I think if you were to pile up and bring in all the state statutes, they're all in a nice leather-bound books, right? They'd stretch the length of this table. Yeah. And every year the legislature goes to Springfield and comes up with 2,000 to 4,000 new ideas that they think should be included in that. Some of them are great ideas. Yeah. A lot of them are not. And a lot of them aren't well thought out as to who's going to pay for it. And the state does have a Mandates Act that says that they're supposed to fund you if you are having a mandate imposed on you. However, they also have the ability to add a line to that says that the State Mandates Act doesn't apply.
It's kind of like them just saying the Constitution doesn't apply here. We're going to reword it.
Yeah, or that home rule is this thing that allows you to do different things as a municipality, and then they pass a law that says, but this doesn't apply to home rule is exempt from this, and it applies to everybody. So there's always a way around the rules.
Yeah, because they write them.
Yeah.
And I remember I was actually with you when I was talking to a former Senate leader when we were talking about local government distributive fund, and he said, well, you say it's your money, but really we can do what we want. We can write any legislation we want to say it's not your money. I mean, that's a mindset there.
One year we were the adversaries, and then I believe the next year we were valued partners because they needed something else.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. We'll talk about that at the end. There's a couple of big ones, but the one that to me, and I'm curious for your take because we haven't discussed this in length, the BUILD Act, the proposal. To me, as a mayor, this may be the worst, most detrimental piece of legislation that I've seen proposed in the 20 years I've been mayor. So why don't you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so I've been doing this in local government space slightly longer than you, but not much.
Okay.
It's the worst bill I've ever seen for local governments.
All right,
it is hands down the worst bill I've ever seen. It takes away so much control from the locals, and really in areas where individuals you're going to have a whole lot of upset homeowners. And in large, what it does is take zoning of residential property and makes a lot of things by right, which for normal people by right just means you can do it. Yeah. And the state or your municipality can't stop them from doing it. So you could see all types of buildings that you're not interested in having next to you suddenly be an allowable use next to you. I think in there is up to a 6 flat on a 2,500 square foot lot.
Yeah.
And I didn't misspeak and say 25,000. I mean 2,500 square feet, which is really small.
1/4 of our typical residential lot.
Correct. That you could have up to a 6 flat on, I think. With one stairwell, which that is an issue, as you know, in law enforcement, the idea of only having one means of ingress, egress. If you talk to our friends who are firefighters and paramedics, that's a huge problem. They've already got problems getting, gurneys up and down stairwells. If you only have one, you're just complicating this even more.
Yeah. What if you have a fire there? How are you getting out?
Lots of problems. Whole lot of problems.
Right. But like I said, I want to give people the information so they don't just have to take our word for it. Mm-hmm. So this is House Bill 5626 and Senate Bill 4071. These are the two.
So the House bill has everything in it.
Sure.
That's sort of every wish list is in there. The Senate has it in 5 or 6 different bills, but it's just components of that one House bill. Yeah.
So really look at House Bill 5626 if you want to read this disaster.
Yeah, and it's only 30 pages. It's not too bad.
Well, yeah. I mean, legislature at all levels passes 1,000-page things, and then they read it later. So, let's talk about this, though, because This to me seems like the key piece of legislation that the governor is promoting.
Absolutely.
And like you had said earlier, the intent, although I believe it's part of a political agenda, but the intent to deal with affordability and housing crisis, that's a real problem. Affordability is a real problem. The housing shortage is a real problem.
Very real.
No question.
Absolutely.
So we're not denying that. But the response from this legislation is so horrific. I'm going to just go over some of these things that some you just touched on. This came from the governor's office.
Correct.
This is not from some right-wing site. Mm-hmm. This is an email that we received from the governor's office.
Correct.
So let's talk about it. Accessory dwelling units, you were talking about it. Homeowners will have the right to develop at least one accessory dwelling unit on their property without the requirement of troublesome processes such as public hearings, inconvenient aesthetic requirements, or outdated familiar relationship mandates. So in other words, where was this from, Virginia?
Yeah.
Or what? Yeah. So here, Virginia, Hugh said, had something very similar. Don, I don't know if you can zoom in on this monstrosity here that was built in somebody's backyard. Well, this is coming to a neighborhood near you if this piece of crap passes.
Yeah.
I mean, probably worse than this, but
yeah, this is a guy in Virginia wanted to build basically a granny flat for his parents so that they could move in with them because, again, there is a housing shortage. They were looking for an economical way to take care of their parents as they got older.
Sure.
Thought, hey, we'll put this addition on. I certainly don't fault the guy for doing it. Now, he might be in trouble because if you read the article, I think he's 7 inches over the property line. But the point of the picture is just to show you, this is an above the garage unit. It's 3 stories. It was a New York Times article. The neighbor complained that now rooms in her house, they're always cold, a little damp because they're never getting sunlight.
Yeah.
They had put a solar system on their roof so that they would be able to take advantage of that and lower their energy costs. It no longer gets sun.
Right. Great.
All things that would be taken into account in the local review process that's currently not proposed in the governor's proposal.
Yeah. It only gets worse. That's actually one of the lesser offensive parts of this legislation. It allows duplexes, triplexes, 4 flats, townhomes, and cottage-style housing in larger residentially zoned lots that tend to permit only single-family homes. So correct me if I'm wrong, as this legislation says. You have your home. You got a home in New Lenox. You don't, but you had a home you should. You have a home in New Lenox.
That's nice.
Joey, I got no issue there. Well, I got issue, but not with that. But you got a single-family home. Next to you is an empty lot. Next to that's another single-family home. But somebody wants to throw up one of these types of home, go right ahead.
Yes.
Nothing the municipality can do about it.
Correct.
Even though it was zoned for and planned for a residential home, you can't, a single-family home, you can throw up a duplex, a triplex, a 4-flat, a cottage, whatever you want, or this thing, whatever I don't even know what you'd call that. If that's a granny flat, you must not like granny because that's horrible. Now, other things that don't seem like a big deal, but they are parking issues. It limits the number of parking spaces that municipalities can require for a new housing construction. Cannot be required to have more than one spot for every 2 multifamily housing units. So you have 8 apartments in a building, but we can't require them to have more than 4 parking spaces.
That's correct.
I mean, I would ask you, it's a rhetorical question, but what's the logical thinking of that? I mean, how are you expecting that? And a lot of times, I know from being where I was the police chief in Chicago Ridge, where we had the highest percentage of multifamily dwellings in Cook County, we were 70% multifamily. There were 3 cars for every 1 apartment in most cases, not half a car.
Yeah.
Well, what is the thinking there?
So if you talk to the advocates for the bill, their argument is that they call it the People Over Parking Act.
Okay.
They did something similar in last year's reworking of the transit system, where they created zones around transit hubs where parking restrictions that municipalities may put on, like requiring a minimum number of parking spaces, where we can no longer do that as part of the transit reform. This is an extension of that to this idea that, well, we're going to put more people in higher density and then they're going to take transit to work. Great. We don't have transit. I think in Will County, if you take out bus on shoulder, we have something like 4 fixed route bus services in all of Will County. And that's no shade to Pace. They do a great job. They do a whole lot of other things. But when it comes to that typical transit that something like this would be advantageous for, we just don't have it.
Right.
We don't have a lot of trains. We have a few, but not many. They obviously have huge parking lots around them because everyone drives to it.
Sure.
If I wanted to get to the nearest train station from my house and I didn't have parking, I'd have to walk. It'd probably be 30 minutes to get to the train station.
In all kind of weather.
Yeah, back and forth.
Yeah.
So it's not a realistic option. There are places where this would work. There's absolutely places in Chicago where this works. There's places in Inner Cook County where this works.
Yeah.
You get farther out into the far parts of Cook County or the collar counties, we just don't have the transit infrastructure to support this. One of the other issues with this is that ADA parking, so all your handicap parking, is based on a percentage of the available parking. So if you eliminate all the parking, there's no longer going to be handicap parking, which is an unintended consequence of this.
Sure.
Also, how big do you want your streets to be? Because now you're talking about off-street parking for all of these people. We know that an apartment doesn't use half a car. It uses a minimum 1. If there's 2 people there, probably 2.
Yeah.
That we're going to have to provide parking for on the street now. In some neighborhoods, the streets aren't wide enough to get a fire truck down them or to get an ambulance down them. Some of them are in cul-de-sacs where you dead end, so now how are they going to get out? This creates all kinds of unintended consequences.
What about safety for kids playing in neighborhoods where the streets are lined with cars up and down? You can't see a kid coming out.
Yeah. And
there's so many problems.
And if you include some of the other things that have been mandated on us by the state, complete streets where we have to look at, should this street have bike lanes or protected sidewalks?
Sure.
What are we going to do there? I mean, you start talking about you'd put a lane for cars on one side, you'd put a bike lane, then you put a through lane, maybe a middle turn lane, another through lane, another bike lane, another parking lane. Now you've suddenly got 70-foot wide streets.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good. That's
and
good.
Sure, your density might go up on the buildings, but it's actually going to go down overall because you've taken all the land out with streets. Yeah.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. It removes the parking requirement for residents under 1,500 square feet, so no parking.
Yeah.
So those people must all walk.
Yes.
No, you can't even have a car. Any affordable housing project, you cannot require any parking. Mm-hmm. Again, it's almost insulting. Like if you're living in affordable housing, you probably can't afford a car, so why do you need a parking spot?
Which we all know is just simply
stupid.
Untrue.
It's stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And retail fronts or other ground level non-residential spaces in mixed use buildings, it eliminates parking there.
Yeah.
How does that work?
No idea.
How, you're walking to all your retail stores and you're carrying everything home?
Well, you'll live upstairs.
Oh, that's right. Oh, you're living right up there, so you just walk down and get it.
I hope the insulation's good because you're going to live next to the train, too.
That's right. That's right. All right, let's keep going with this just for a minute. Buildings taller than 3 stories must have 2 exit stairways, despite research showing that 1 exit stair. I'd like to see the research. Who was the moron that said that in a 3-story or taller building, that 1 exit, we were just talking about this, is a good idea? I mean, seriously.
I couldn't tell you where that came from.
I mean, it's just, in their response to that is, well, requiring a single exit stairway frees up valuable space for more people to live. Mm-hmm. I mean, they'll die in there when a fire comes, but at least they will have lived there for a little while until we had an arson.
Yeah, there was
the guy who was out on a pretrial release from the Safety Act.
There was a hearing about this last week in the Senate, and one of the arguments for that was that a developer could have made their apartments 3-bedroom apartments, and instead they had to make them 2-bedroom because you had to put a stairwell in. Yeah. I don't think that's a problem. I understand that there's a desire to have more housing. We need to do that, but not at life safety issues.
Well, this allows it for 6-story buildings, too. Yeah. 6-story building, 1 stairway.
Yeah, it does say something about there needs to be some additional
sprinklers.
Sprinklers.
Okay.
Your insurance company will tell you in a lot of cases that sprinklers are actually, there's more risk of your sprinkler going off or leaking than there ever is of your house catching on fire and the sprinklers putting it out.
Yeah, that's great. So that's out. And then it establishes clear timelines. So in other words, it ties to, take a municipality like New Lenox that's growing. We're very, very busy. And because the state takes away our funding, it's not like I can have 1,000 extra employees around here to handle all of the development that we have going on. But if we can't respond in a timely manner, there can be some third-party group that can respond. Our timelines are no longer relevant.
Correct.
For approving these projects.
Yeah. And none of this does anything. The biggest cost drivers of a new house is not your local zoning control.
No,
it is not that you've got to pay a permit fee. It's not that if you're building somewhere completely new, you'd have to pay a sewer water tap-on fee or something. This does nothing to lower the cost of materials, which have skyrocketed, in the last several years. The cost of labor is not included in this. Weirdly, you had everyone and their brother at this hearing last week. Labor was not a part of it, which is an interesting dynamic for Springfield.
Yeah.
But labor costs are not addressed. Material costs are not addressed. Your homeowners' insurance rates that continue to go up. Your property taxes that continue to go up that raise the cost of housing. None of that is addressed in this bill. And so I don't know what any of this is going to do to actually lower the cost of building a new house, which is the goal, okay, great. Let's lower that cost. But if you're not going to address materials, labor, these other things that go with it, other than taking away local control, this doesn't do much. It's been a failure in other states where they've done it. California passed basically the same thing. It's called YIMBY, is sort of the technocrat name for this. Yeah. It's this
in my backyard.
Yes for every option.
Yeah.
California expected to have about 750,000 new units a year built, which is a lot, except when you think of how big California is, it's a drop in the bucket. They saw 100,000 new units built, or about natural growth.
Yeah.
So it's not getting the results that people think it's going to get in other states that have done it. And we're modeling ours right on that. So if we're modeling it on that,
on a failed system,
why don't we realize that there's a system here that doesn't work?
And that is the point that I was making. Again, the people in this community know me. So I don't play politics. I don't care. I put a lot of stuff out there, but you know me as well. Mm-hmm. We've had the conversation, because a lot of people, as you know, come to me and say, why don't you run for this? Why don't you run for that? Because to one side I'm a rhino, and to the other side I'm still a horrible Republican. It doesn't matter. There's no home for me within either political party that would satisfy the needs of that leadership. I'm a middle of the road guy. You are. We talk about these things. When I was representing our legislative wing at Governmental League with you, and Governor Rauner was in, and I was on his Christmas card list prior to that meeting. And he came in and he said that 40-point anti-union agenda. And I said, Governor, we can't support that. And he got up, looked at us, and walked out of the room. So I wasn't thrilled with that either. So for me, this is not about Republican, Democrat, ever.
No.
Is it about Republican? You know me. I don't care about Republican, Democrat. I care about government and legislation. And I'm happy to hear you say, because you are a logical person who works with this every day, that you're in agreement. This is the worst piece of crap that's ever been put forth before us. And it looks like it's going to be pushed and shoved down our throats. I mean, are you hearing? I mean, I know this is a key piece. The governor is out there very vocally pushing this Build Act.
Yeah. So we had our lobby day 2 weeks ago, which is where we take a bunch of mayors down to Springfield, spend the day meeting with leadership, meeting with the governor's office generally, about sort of the big issues. Not your New Lenox wants 100,000 for something, but these types of issues.
Sure, yeah.
That's a separate trip.
That's right.
But, we were there the day after the realtors were there.
Yeah.
I had 25 municipal folks with me. There were several hundred, if not 1,000 realtors in Springfield the 48 hours before. They did a great job of promoting their side, which is this Build Act. The governor spoke at their event. Sure. The Speaker of the House spoke at their event, talking about the importance of affordable housing. Now, the Speaker, I will say, mentioned, as he does municipal laws, his stock and trade, that we need to talk to the municipalities about this a little more. So that was encouraging.
Yeah, it would be a good start.
There was a hearing last week, like I mentioned, in the Senate, where we were able to have Mayor Noak from Romeoville, who's our current president, testify on the bill and bring up a lot of these practical concerns. Again, there's no mayor in Will County that's thinking that affordable housing and the amount of housing that we currently have meets the needs. We all know we need more housing. I grew up in Shorewood. I live in Joliet because when I first moved out, there was nowhere in Shorewood that was affordable for me to live.
Sure.
That happens in a lot of towns around here. You
Sure
come
it
home
does.
from college.
Sure it does.
Most first jobs, this isn't 50 years ago. You could get a starter home. Your starter home might be your forever home at this point, or you're always going to be in a townhouse. And that's a lot of people, that's the lifestyle they want now. But it's hard when you've got to tell your kids, no, you can't move home to your hometown. Because there's nothing affordable for you here. And you can't move to your neighboring towns either, because it's also equally as challenging. So I think everyone gets that it's a problem. We want to do more. We want to see incentives for things. We want to see help with planning. For a municipality to redo their zoning code to meet all the modern standards, because for most communities, they probably developed their zoning code when they incorporated. It's been that with all these sort of additions put on top of it and on top of it and on top of it, and it becomes a crazy mess by the time we get to today. If a community wants to do that on their own, I'm told in most cases by community development directors, that's if they have nothing else to do, which this is Will County, we've always got a new project.
Always, yeah.
If they have nothing else to do, it would take them 3 years.
Just to get through.
Get through the zoning stuff and change it. And you have to have public hearings and you have to involve the public, which is great. This doesn't do any of that. It tries to change it all in one fell swoop. And when you do
without
that,
public hearings,
with no public input at all, that's a problem. And so we're looking for those solutions. We've talked about overlay zones where you pick a part of town where you say, you know what, this does make sense. We could do things like this.
Yes.
In this area, it doesn't make sense over here for a myriad of reasons. But if we don't do that and we don't have some control over this, then it's just going to lead to chaos, whether it's water and sewer systems that were never designed to handle double the amount of people, schools that didn't plan to have all these extra students suddenly, an influx. So as long as we can plan around this and do that, I think education and outreach to mayors is always important. Talk about what the issues are, talk about what potential solutions are, and find ways to make it work for your community. This top-down, shall's an important word in Springfield. Big difference between shall and may.
Yeah.
This you shall approach is just headed for disaster.
What it really is getting to the point, what is the point of having county and local government if Springfield just wants to have a one-size-fits-all for every town in Illinois?
That was the theme of our lobby day this year, was all about local control. Yeah. It was the solar issues that we touched on. It was the housing issues that we touched on. And then the last one was data centers. Yeah. Because the state wants to get more involved in the siting as well as the requirements with data centers.
Those battery storage facilities were part of those you can't say no as well.
Correct.
Yeah. So, I think, I'm a realist because As you know, I frequently post things, even though I can't stand social media. I frequently post because people are on there. And no matter what I post, and I try to be, just real honest about what it is, I got this side saying, oh, you're going too easy on them. This side, oh, you're going too hard on them. But I have people every day, coming up to me saying, hey, I really agree with everything you say, everything you're writing about everything. Because I think most of us do live in that middle area where we all want the same thing, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or don't care about politics. You want to be safe. You want to have a quality of life. You want to have health care. You want your kids to have a good education.
Yeah.
That's not aligned to any party.
No.
We're good, kind, compassionate people. But this extremism that we're seeing that happens all over the country on both sides of the aisle is horrible. It just so happens to be in Illinois. It's happening to the far left.
Yeah. It's as you said, there are multiple states where the right has just as much control as the Democrats do in Illinois.
Sure.
And you see things going different directions. So it's like I said, it's a problem nationwide. It really is the sort of social media-ification of politics has become a problem.
Yeah.
There was a great line in the West Wing where the president's in a debate, and he says, what are the next 5 words to a guy about his answer? Because right now we're only giving those 5-word answers.
That's right.
And it's just these little snippets, and it makes people angry, and it gets engagement, and that's all that those companies care about is your attention.
That's it.
And when you have those longer format discussions, I think you see most people are generally, just as you said, they just want to live their life.
That's it.
They want to be left alone.
That's it. But what we're seeing is it used to be that people would move to another state for the weather. Now they're moving to another state for the politics, and that's wrong.
Yeah.
And that's really a sad state of affairs for our country, and it leads to that division. We're all here and you're all there, and that's not how we're supposed to live our lives.
And we're seeing it both ways,
Yeah,
right?
of course,
We're seeing
100%.
it both ways. You see kids choosing their colleges based on, well, what state is it in, because I want to know what laws I'm going to be governed under. And that's uncalled for. It shouldn't be. We shouldn't have gotten to this place.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, again, as a mayor, I want to thank you not only for being here today, but for the great work that you do on behalf of Will County government. You really put in a lot of time. I also congratulations again on the decades-long work that you've been doing for juvenile diabetes and for diabetes in general.
Thanks.
It's really important to us. We need to keep fighting these things. There are good legislators on both sides of the aisle. I know that you deal with in Springfield.
Great ones.
But the reality is quite often they're whether you're at the state level or at the federal level, there are those behind the scenes that are saying, you still want to be here? Here's where here's what you're going to have to do. And unfortunately, sometimes those legislators make those poor choices because they want to stay in their job.
Or they vote for something terrible because it was going to be even worse.
Yeah.
Which has happened too.
Isn't that horrible? Yeah. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it. Don, I know this was kind of a long one, but thank you for everything that you always do. And for those of you, I hope you stay tuned for this whole thing. We had a lot of great information here with Hugh O'Hare, and I appreciate you tuning in to this edition of Too Honest for Social Media.
Stealing your life away, deny your defensible, choose your fate from hate to the black hole. Either way, the fire escape is closed. You're the first of the